Raskolnikov was not accustomed to crowds, and, as we've already said, had been avoiding all forms of society, particularly of late. However, now he had a sudden longing for company. Something new seemed to be accomplishing itself within him, and one of the things that went with it was a kind of craving for people. So tired was he, after a whole month of concentrated depression and gloomy excitement, that he wanted, if only for a single moment, to get his breath back in another environment, no matter what it was. And in spite of all the filth of his surroundings, he was now content to stay on sitting in the drinking den. The owner of the establishment was in another room, but he frequently entered the main one, coming down into it by way of some steps, whereupon the first thing one saw of him was his dandified black boots with their large red flapped tops. He was wearing a long-waisted podjovka and a hideously greasy black velvet waistcoat. He wore no cravat, and his entire face looked as though it had been lubricated with oil, like an iron lock. Behind the bar was a boy of 14. There was also another younger boy who took the drinks round when anyone ordered anything. On the bar there were sliced cucumbers, black sukari, and some cut-up pieces of fish. All of it smelt very bad. The place was suffocatingly hot, making it almost unbearable to sit there, and so saturated with the fumes of alcohol that the air on its own would have been enough to make a man drunk in 5 minutes. There are some encounters, even with people who are complete strangers to us, in which we begin to take an interest right from the very first glance, suddenly, before we've uttered a word. This was precisely the impression made on Raskolnikov by the customer who was sitting some distance away and who looked like a retired civil servant. Several times later, the young man would recall this first impression, would even ascribe it to foreknowledge. He kept glancing at the civil servant incessantly, no doubt because the official was staring persistently at him, and seemed very anxious to get into conversation with him. At the other people in the drinking den, including the owner, however, the official cast a look that seemed in some way habituated, even bored, containing a shade of haughty disdain, as though these were people of inferior social class and education, to whom he had nothing to say. He was a man already on the other side of 50, of average height, stocky constitution, with hair that was turning grey and a large bald patch. His face had the swollen look that comes from constant drinking, yellow, almost greenish in colour, with puffy eyelids through which his tiny slit-like eyes shone, reddish and animated. But there was something very strange about him. His gaze displayed an enthusiasm that was positively luminous, and said that here there were most likely both sense and intelligence. But at the same time there was a flicker of something akin to madness. He was wearing an old and completely tattered black dress coat, which had shed all of its buttons except one. This one button was still managing to hang on somehow, and he had it fastened, evidently wishing to observe the proprieties. From under his nankeen waistcoat protruded a white dicky, all crumpled, splashed and stained. He was clean-shaven, in the manner appropriate to government officials. But it must have been a long time since his last shave, for a thick greyish stubble had begun to appear on his features. There was in his manner, too, something that bespoke the solid, dependable air of civil servant. He was, however, in a state of agitation. He kept ruffling his hair, and from time to time would prop his head in both hands as if in despair, placing his threadbare elbows on the splashy and sticky table. At last he looked straight at Raskolnikov and said loudly and firmly, "My dear sir, may I make so bold as to address you with some polite conversation? For although you're not in a condition of eminence, experience tells me that you are a man of education, unhabituated to the beverage. I personally have always respected education, united with the feelings of the heart, and am, if I may so inform you, a titular councillor. Marmeladov, such is my name, titular councillor. Dare I inquire whether you yourself have been working in the service?" "No, I'm studying," the young man answered, rather surprised both at the speaker's peculiarly flowery tone and at being spoken to in such a direct, point-blank manner. In spite of his recent momentary desire for any kind of contact with people, at the first word that was actually addressed to him, he suddenly felt his customary irritable and unpleasant sense of revulsion towards any stranger who touched, or merely attempted to touch, his personal individuality. "So, you're a student, or an ex-student?" the civil servant cried. "I knew it! Experienced it, sir! Repeated experience!" And he put a finger to his forehead as a token of bravado. "You've been a student, or have trodden the path of learning. But if you'll permit me—" He rose to his feet, swayed slightly, picked up his jug and glass, and came over and sat down at the young man's table, slightly to one side of him. He was intoxicated, but he spoke volubly and with eloquence, only on occasion losing his thread slightly and slurring his speech. He pounced upon Raskolnikov avidly, as though he had not spoken to anyone for a whole month either. "My dear, respected sir," he began with almost ceremonial formality, "poverty is not a sin. That is a true saying. I know that drunkenness is not a virtue either, and that is even truer saying. But destitution, dear sir, destitution, that is a sin. When a man is poor, he may still preserve his nobility and his inborn feelings, but when he's destitute, he never ever can. If a man's destitute, he isn't even driven out with a stick. He's swept out of human society with a broom, to make it as insulting as possible. And that is as it should be, for I will admit that when I'm destitute, I'm the first to insult myself. Hence the beverage. Dear sir, a month ago, Mr. Lebeziatnikov gave my lady wife a most unmerciful beating. And that's not quite the same as if he had given it to me, now is it? Do you take my meaning, sir? Permit me to ask you another question, sir. Have you ever spent the night on the Neva, on the hay barges?" "No, I haven't had occasion to," Raskolnikov replied. "What are you driving at?" "Well, sir, that's where I've just come from. This night will be the 5th I've spent there." He poured himself another glass and drank it and paused for reflection. The odd wisp of hay could indeed be seen sticking to his clothes. There were even some in his hair. It looked highly probable that for 5 days he had neither undressed nor washed. His hands in particular were filthy, red and oleaginous, with black fingernails. His conversation seemed to be arousing general, though indolent, attention. The boys behind the bar had begun to snigger. The owner, it appeared, had come down from his upstairs room specially in order to listen to the funny man, and had sat down some distance away, yawning languidly, but with an air of importance. It was evident that Marmeladov had long been a familiar figure here. Indeed, he had probably acquired his penchant for flowery rhetoric as a consequence of being used to frequent boozy conversations with strangers of various types. This habit becomes a necessity with some drinkers, particularly those who are given rough treatment at home and whose lives are made a misery. It is for this reason that in the company of other drinkers they invariably seem to be doing all they can to justify themselves, and if possible, even to gain respect. "Oh, funny man," the owner said loudly. "Why don't you do any work? Why don't you do any serving if you're a civil servant?" "You ask why I'm not currently engaged in the service, dear sir?" Marmeladov said quickly, addressing himself exclusively to Raskolnikov, as though it were the latter who had asked the question. "You ask me that? Do you think my reptilian existence doesn't make my heart weep? A month ago, when Mr. Lebeziatnikov unmercifully beat my lady wife, and I simply lay there drunk, don't you think I suffered? Permit me to inquire, young man, whether you have ever had occasion to ask for a loan of some money when it's hopeless." "Oh, yes, I have, but what do you mean, when it's hopeless?" What I mean, sir, is when it's completely hopeless, when you know beforehand that nothing will come of it. For example, you know in advance with absolute certainty that this man, this most well-intentioned and thoroughly useful citizen, will on no account lend you money. For why? I ask you, should he? I mean, he knows I won't pay it back to him. Out of compassion? But only the other day, Mr. Lebezineatikov, who follows the latest ideas, was explaining the science of our day, has actually declared compassion a social evil, and that this notion is already being put into practice in England, where they have political economy. Why, I ask you, should he lend me anything? And yet, knowing beforehand that he won't, you nonetheless set off down the high road, and... But why go to him? Raskolnikov added. But if there is no one, if there is nowhere left to go, I mean, everyone must have at least somewhere to go. For there comes a time in every man's life when he simply must have somewhere he can go. When my only daughter went on the yellow card for the first time, I went then too. For my daughter lives by the yellow card, sir, he added in parenthesis, looking at the young man with a certain uneasiness. No matter, my dear sir, no matter, he hastened to add, evidently quite unruffled, as both of the boys snorted with laughter, and even the owner smiled. No matter, such wagging of heads does not confound me, for it's all well known to everyone already, and that which was hid is now revealed. Indeed, my attitude to all that now is not one of contempt, but of resignation. So be it, so be it. Behold the man. Permit me to ask you, young man, whether you can... But no, I must put it more strongly, more figuratively. Not can you, but dare you, as you look upon me in this hour, say beyond all shadow of a doubt that I'm not a swine? The young man said not a word in reply. Well, sir, the orator continued in a tone of massive assurance, which even had an increased air of dignity about it this time, after he had waited once more for the sniggering that had ensued in the room to die down. Well, sir, so be it. I am a swine, but she is a lady. I may possess bestial form, but Katerina Ivanovna, my lady wife, is a person of education, and a field officer's daughter. So be it, so be it. I am a blackguard, but she has been filled by her upbringing with both lofty spirit and ennobled feelings, and yet, oh, if she would only take pity on me, oh, my dear sir, my dear respected sir, I mean, every man must have at least one place where people take pity on him. Even though Katerina Ivanovna is a magnanimous lady, she is also an unjust one. And though I'm well aware that when she tugs my locks, she does it solely out of the kindness of her heart, for I say it again, without embarrassment, she tugs my locks, young man, he affirmed with special dignity, having detected more sniggering. But, oh, God, if only one single time she would... Oh, but no, no, all that's in vain. And there's no more to be said, no more to be said. For on more than one occasion I attained that which I desired, and pity was shown me on more than one occasion, but such is my proclivity. I am a born brute. You can say that again, the owner remarked, yawning. Marmeladov resolutely hammered his fist down on the table. Such is my proclivity. Do you know, dear sir, that I even bartered her stockings for drink? Not her shoes, sir, for that would have been ever so slightly in the normal way of events, but her stockings. It was her stockings I pawned. She had a little mohair scarf given to her as a present before our marriage. It was hers, not mine, and I bartered that, too. Yet we live in a cold corner of a room, and that winter she caught a chill and began to cough, brought out blood, she did. And we have 3 little children, and Katerina Ivanovna works from morning to night, scrubbing and washing and bathing the children, for she's been used to cleanliness since an early age. She has a weak chest and a predisposition to tuberculosis, and I feel that. How could I not feel it? And the more I drink, the more I feel. That's the reason for my drinking. I'm looking for feeling and compassion in it. Not revelry do I seek, but pure sorrow. I drink, for I desire to suffer doubly. And as if in despair, he let his head sink onto the table. Young man, he went on, straightening up, in your features I seem to read a certain unhappiness. I saw it as soon as you came in, and that's why I lost no time in appealing to you, for in communicating to you the story of my life, I seek to avoid exposing myself to the most grotesque ridicule in the eyes of these lovers of idleness, to whom it is all in any case common knowledge. And coming to you, perceiving you to be a man of sensitivity and education, I may as well tell you that my lady wife was brought up in high-class establishment for daughters in the local aristocracy, and that the ball that was held upon her graduation she danced with the shawl in the presence of the governor and other notables, for which she received a gold medal and a testimonial of good progress. The medal, the medal got sold a long time ago. But she still keeps the testimonial in her travelling box, and not so long ago she showed it to our landlady. Even though she exists in a state of the most incessant strife with our landlady, she felt a desire to take a bit of pride in herself in front of someone for a change, and to tell her about her happy bygone days. And I don't condemn her, for these memories are all that remain to her now. The rest has all passed to ashes. Yes, she's a hot-tempered, proud, and indomitable lady. She scrubs the floors herself. She lives on black bread, but she won't tolerate disrespect towards herself. That's why she made Mr. Lebeziatnikov pay for his coarse behaviour. And when Mr. Lebeziatnikov gave her a battering in return, she took to her bed. Not so much because of the beating she had received, as because her feelings had been hurt. She was a widow when I married her, with 3 children, each smaller than the other. Her first marriage to an infantry officer had been an affair of the heart. She had run away from her parents' house in order to be with him. She loved that husband of hers beyond all bounds. But he took to gambling at cards, got into trouble with the law, and then died. Towards the end he used to beat her, and although she made him pay for it, in terms for which I have irrefutable and documentary evidence, she remembers him to this day with tears in her eyes, and uses him in order to reproach me. And I'm glad, for even though it's only in her imaginings, she's able to perceive herself as having once been happy. And after his death she was left with 3 little children in the remote and brutish government district where I happened to be at that time, left in such hopeless destitution, moreover, that although I have experienced a good many various things, I'm unable to even describe it. Her relatives had all turned their backs on her too, and she was proud, far too proud. And it was then, dear sir, it was then that I, also in a widowed state, with a 14-year-old daughter by my first wife, offered her my hand, for I could not bear to look at such suffering. You may be able to judge the degree of her misfortunes by the fact that she, an educated, well-brought-up woman from a family of renown, should have consented to marry a man such as myself. But marry me she did. Weeping and sobbing and wringing her hands, she married me, for she had nowhere left to go. Do you understand? Do you understand, dear sir, what it means to have nowhere left to go? No, that you do not yet understand. And for a whole year I discharged my duties piously and devoutly, and did not touch this. He prodded a finger at his half-stoffe of vodka. For I do have feelings, but even that failed to please. And then I lost my job, and that wasn't my fault either. It was because of a staff reorganisation. And then my abstemiousness came to an end. It's now 1.5 years since we at last found ourselves, after wanderings and many tribulations, in this magnificent capital city, adorned as it is with numerous monuments, and here I obtained a job. Obtained it and lost it again. Do you understand, sir? This time I lost it through my own fault, for my proclivity started to act up again. And now we live in a corner, in the apartment of our landlady, Amalia Ivanovna Lipovexel. And what we live on, and how we manage to pay our rent, I do not know. There are a lot of other people living there besides us. It's a Sodom, sir, of the most outrageous kind. Yes. And in the meantime, my daughter, the one from my first marriage, has also grown to a woman's estate, and the things she has had to put up with from her stepmother in the process I will not tell you. For although Katerina Ivanovna is full of magnanimous emotions, she is a hot-tempered and irritable lady, and she likes cutting people short. Yes, sir. Well, there's no point in raking over all that again. As you may imagine, Sonia has received no education. About 4 years ago, I tried to take her through the elements of geography and world history. But since I myself was never very strong in those branches of knowledge, and there were no suitable textbooks, for the books we did have, well, we don't even have them anymore, those books, and that was the end of the whole attempt at her instruction. We stopped at Cyrus of Persia. Later on, when she had already attained maturity, she read a few books of a romantic content. And quite recently, through the agents of Mr. Lebzianikov, she obtained a copy of Lewis's Physiology. Are you familiar with it, sir? And read it with great interest. She even communicated extracts from it aloud to us. And there you have the full extent of her enlightenment. But now I will address you, my dear respected sir, with a private question on my own account. In your opinion, can a poor but honest girl expect to earn a great deal by honest work? She'll be lucky to earn 15 kopecks a day, sir, if she's honest and has no particular talents. And even that's only if she never takes a moment off. And what's more, State Councillor Klopstock, Ivan Ivanovich, perhaps you've heard of him, has not only to this day refused to give her the money he owes her for a half-dozen shirts she made him, but actually turned her out of his house, stamping his foot and calling her indecent names, on the pretext that the shirt collars were the wrong size and not cut straight. And there are the little ones with no food in their bellies. And there's Katerina Ivanovna, wringing her hands, pacing up and down the room, and saying, with the red spots standing out on her cheeks, as they invariably do in that illness, "You live with us, you female parasite! You eat our food and drink our drink, and take advantage of our heating!" Yet what could she have been eating and drinking when even the little ones hadn't seen a crust of bread for 3 days? I was lying in bed at the time. Oh, what the hell, I was drunk, sir. And I heard my Sonia. She's as meek as a lamb, and has such a gentle little voice. She has fair hair, and her little face is always pale and thin. I heard my Sonia say, "Oh, no, Katerina Ivanovna, you don't want me to go and do that, do you?" Yet Darya Frantsovna, an ill-intentioned woman who's been in trouble with the police on many occasions, had already 2 or 3 times been to make inquiries through the landlady. "What if I do?" replied Katerina Ivanovna mockingly. "What's there to protect? Some treasure?" Don't blame her. Don't blame her, dear sir, don't blame her. It was something she said when she wasn't in full possession of her faculties. She was ill and agitated, and her children hadn't had anything to eat and were crying. It was said more in order to wound than in any precise sense, for that's just the way Katerina Ivanovna is by nature. And soon as the children cry, for example, even if it's because they're hungry, she immediately starts beating them. Well, then I saw Sonechka, this would be at about 6 o'clock in the evening, get up, put on her shawl and her burnous mantlet and leave the apartment. And at 9 o'clock she came back again. She came in, went straight up to Katerina Ivanovna, and silently put down 30 roubles on the table in front of her. Not one word did she say as she did this. She didn't even give her a look. She just picked up our big green drap-de-dam shawl. We have a drap-de-dam shawl, which we will all make use of, completely covered her head and face with it, and lay down on her bed with her face to the wall. Only her little shoulders and the rest of her body kept quivering. And meanwhile I went on lying there in the state I'd been in all along. And then, young man, I saw Katerina Ivanovna go over to Sonechka's bed without saying a word, and all evening she kneeled before her, kissed her feet, wouldn't get up, and then they both fell asleep together in each other's arms. Both of them. Yes, sir. While I lay there drunk. Marmeladov fell silent, as though his voice had been cut off by inward emotion. Then he suddenly refilled his glass in haste, drank its contents down, and grunted. "Ever since then, my dear sir," he continued, after a period of silence. "Ever since then, because of a certain inauspicious happening, and the fact that some ill-intentioned persons reported the matter to the authorities, something in which Darya Frantsovna played a leading role, apparently in order to get her own back for not having been treated with due respect. Ever since then, my daughter Sofia Semyonovna has been compelled to take the yellow card, and on account of that has been unable to remain with us. For one thing, our landlady, Amalia Ivanovna, would not allow it, although earlier she herself had been given Darya Frantsovna a helping hand. And for another, Mr. Lebzianatkov, well, you see, it was because of Sonia that entire episode between him and Katerina Ivanovna took place. To start with, he had made the most persistent advances towards Sonechka. But then he went and took umbrage, saying, "How could I, a man of such enlightenment, live in the same apartment as a girl like that?" And Katerina Ivanovna made him pay for that remark. She took her daughter's side. Well, and then it happened, and now Sonechka looks in to see us more towards evening, when it's getting dark, and she tries to make things easier for Katerina Ivanovna and does everything she can to help her. She lodges with Kapernaumov, the tailor. She rents a bit of floor space from him. Kapernaumov's lame, and he suffers from a speech disorder, like all the numerous members of his family. His wife has a speech disorder too. They live in the one room, but Sonia has her own bit of space, partitioned off from the rest. Yes, they are of the very poorest. Poor folk who can't speak properly. Yes, well. That morning, sir, I girded up my loins, attired myself in my rags, raised my hands to heaven, and set off to see His Excellency Ivan Afanasyevitch. Perhaps you're familiar with His Excellency Ivan Afanasyevitch? Oh, no? Well, in that case, you don't know a man of true meekness. He's wax before the countenance of the Lord. For the wax it melteth. He even shed a tear or two after he'd heard what I had to tell him. "Well, Marmeladov," he said, "you've already let me down once. I'll take you on once again, on my own personal responsibility this time." Those were his very words. "But mind now," he said, "and off you go." I kissed the dust at his feet, mentally, for in reality he would never have permitted it, being one of the top brass and a man of the very latest ideas with regard to education and public service. I returned home, and when I announced that I'd got my job back and would be receiving my salary again, Lord, what happened then? Marmeladov again broke off in violent agitation. Just at that moment a whole party of tipplers, who were already quite drunk, came in off the street, and outside the entrance the sounds of a rented hurdy-gurdy and the small cracked voice of a 7-year-old child singing "The Little Homestead" became audible. It grew noisy, and the owner and his crew began to attend to the newcomers' requirements. Marmeladov, paying no attention to the new arrivals, began to continue his story. By now he seemed to have grown very weak, but the more the drink went to his head, the more eager he became to talk. The memories of his recent success in the field of work seemed to have enlivened him, and were even reflected in his features by a kind of radiance. Raskolnikov listened closely. "Well, my dear sir, that was 5 weeks ago, yes. As soon as the two of them, Katerina Ivanovna and Sonechka, heard the news, Lord, it was as though I'd been spirited away to paradise. Before, I'd lie around like a brute and get nothing but abuse. But now they went around on tiptoe, keeping the children quiet. Semyon Dakarich is tired after his work. He's having a rest. Shh. And they'd bring me coffee before I went off in the morning. They even boiled cream for me. They began serving me with real cream. Can you imagine? And how they managed to scrape together the money to buy me a decent uniform. 11 roubles and 50 kopecks it cost. I simply do not understand. Boots, calico shirt fronts of the most magnificent quality, a uniform jacket. They got together the whole lot for 11 roubles 50, and all in the most excellent condition, sir. On the first day I got back from work, I saw that Katerina Ivanovna had made 2 courses for dinner, soup and salt beef with horseradish sauce, something previously quite unheard of. She has no dresses, I mean none at all, sir, yet now she looked as though she were going out visiting, all dressed up smart. And it wasn't that she'd made do with what she had, she'd quite simply made it all from nothing. She'd done her hair up nicely, put on a clean little collar and oversleeves, and she looked quite a different person, younger and prettier. My little dove Sonetchka had only been helping us out with money, but now, she said, she didn't think it was a good idea for her to come and see us too often, and she'd only drop in after dark, when no one would see her. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I went to have a nap after dinner, and would you believe it, Katerina Ivanovna hadn't been able to resist temptation. A week earlier she'd quarrelled in the worst kind of way with Amalia Ivanovna, our landlady, but now she'd asked her in for a cup of coffee. 2 hours they sat, whispering all the time. Semyon Zakharich is working again and drawing his salary. He went to see His Excellency. His Excellency came out in person, told all the others to wait, and led Semyon Zakharich by the arm past them all into his office. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Well, of course, Semyon Zakharich, he said, bearing in mind the services you have been rendering to us in the past, and even though you've been indulging in that frivolous foible of yours, since you're now ready to make a promise, and since, moreover, things have been going badly for us in your absence, can you imagine? Can you imagine? I now rely upon your word of honour, he said. In other words, I tell you, she'd gone and made up a whole long story, and not out of silliness, but solely because she wanted to do a bit of boasting, sir. No, so she believes it all herself. She amuses herself with her own imaginings. I swear to God, sir, I don't condemn her. No, that I don't condemn. And a week ago, when I brought my first pay packet, 23 roubles and 40 kopecks, home with me intact, she called me her little minnow. There, my little minnow, she said. Marmeladov broke off and was about to smile, but suddenly his chin began to work up and down spasmodically. He managed, however, to bring himself under control. This drinking house, the man's air of debauchery, his 5 nights on the hay barges, the jug of vodka, together with his morbid affection for his wife and family, had thrown his listener off balance. Raskolnikov had been listening intently, but with a sense of unhealthy discomfort. He was annoyed at himself for having come here. My dear sir, Marmeladov exclaimed, having recovered himself. Oh, my dear respected sir, you probably think this is ridiculous, like everyone else. But I'm just upsetting you with the stupidity of all these insignificant details about my domestic life. But they're no laughing matter for me, for I feel it all. And I spent the whole of that most heavenly day of my life, and all the evening as well, in transient reveries of how I would organise everything, buy clothes for the children, give her rest and tranquillity, and turn back my only begotten daughter from the ways of dishonour onto the bosom of her family, and much, much else. It's permissible, sir. Well, my dear sir. Marmeladov suddenly seemed to give a start. He raised his head and stared at his listener. Well, the very next day, after all those reveries, just 5 days ago, in other words, towards evening, I managed to filch the key to Katerina Ivanovna's travelling box, took out what was left of the salary I'd brought home. How much it was in all I don't remember, and now here I am. Look at me, everyone. My 5th day away from home, and they're looking for me, and it's all over with my job, and my uniform jacket's lying in the drinking den next to Egypt Bridge, where I exchanged it for my present apparel, and it's all over. Marmeladov struck himself on the forehead with his fist, gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, leaned one elbow mightily on the table. But a moment later, his features suddenly altered, and with a sort of unnatural cunning, and manufactured insolence, he looked at Raskolnikov, laughed, and said, "I went over to Sonia's today to ask her for money so I could treat my hangover." "You don't mean to say she gave it to you?" someone shouted from the direction of the new arrivals, following this up with a roar of laughter. "This very jug of vodka was purchased with her money," Marmeladov enunciated, addressing himself solely to Raskolnikov. 30 kopecks she gave me, with her own hands. The last money she had. I could see it for myself. She didn't say anything, just looked at me in silence. That's what it's like. Not here upon earth, but up there, where people are grieved over and wept for, but not reproached, not reproached. But it hurts even worse, sir, if one isn't reproached. 30 kopecks, yes, sir, but I mean, she'll be needing them now, won't she, eh? What do you think, my dear? After all, she has to keep herself clean nowadays. Cleanliness like that costs money. It's of a particular sort, if you take my meaning. Yes, and she also has to buy face cream and lipstick. I mean, she can't manage without them, sir. Starched petticoats, a certain style of shoe, high-heeled, to show off her foot when she has to step over a puddle. Do you understand? Do you understand, sir, what cleanliness like that involves? Well, sir, and there I went, her own natural father, and swiped those 30 kopecks for my hangover, and I'm drinking them away, sir. I've already drunk them. Well, who would ever take pity on someone like myself, eh, sir? Do you feel pity for me now, sir? He tried to pour himself another glass, but the effort was in vain. The half-stoff was empty. "Why would anybody feel pity for you?" shouted the owner, who had once more reappeared to one side of them. There was a burst of laughter mixed with swear words. The laughter and abuse came from people who had been listening, but also from those who had not, but were simply staring at the extraordinary figure presented by this unemployed civil servant. "Pity for me? Why should anyone feel pity for me?" Marmeladov suddenly began to wail, rising to his feet with one arm stretched in front of him, in a state of positive inspiration, as though these were precisely the words he'd been waiting for. "Why should anyone feel pity for me, you say? Indeed, there's nothing to pity me for. I ought to be crucified upon a cross, not pitified. Crucify him, O heavenly judge, crucify him, and when it is done, take pity on him. And then I myself will come to thee for mortification, for it is not merrymaking that I seek, but sorrow and tears. Do you think, master publican, that I drank this jug of vodka of yours for the sake of enjoyment? Sorrow is what I sought at its bottom, sorrow and tears, and of those I've partaken, and those have I found. And the one who will take pity on me is him that hath pity for all men, and whose wisdom passeth all understanding. He alone is our judge. He will come this day and inquire, and where is the daughter that hath not spared herself for the sake of her harsh-tongued and consumptive stepmother, and for young children that are not her own kith and kin? Where is the daughter who took pity on her earthly father, an obscene drunkard, undismayed by his bestial nature? And he will say unto her, Come unto me, I have already forgiven thee once. Thy sins, which are many, are forgiven, for thou lovest much. And he'll forgive Sonia. He'll forgive her, I know he will. I felt that then, when I went to see her, felt it in my heart, and he will judge and forgive everyone, the good and the bad, the wise and the meek. And when he is done with all of them, he will raise up his voice to us, saying unto us, Come out, ye drunkards! Come out, O ye that are weak! Come out, ye that live in shame! And we shall come out, and shall not be ashamed, and shall stand before him, and he will say unto us, Ye are as swine, made in the image of the beast, and marked with his brand. But come ye also. And the wise and the learned will raise up their voices, saying, Lord, why dost thou receive them? And he'll say unto them, Because they are none of them that ever believed themselves worthy of it. And he'll stretch out his hand to us, and we shall fall down and weep and understand everything. And then we'll understand everything. Everyone will understand, even Katerina Ivanovna. Even she will understand. O Lord, thy kingdom come. And he slumped onto the bench, exhausted and enfeebled, not looking at anyone, as though oblivious of his surroundings and sunk in deep thought. His words had made a certain impression, and for a moment silence reigned. But as soon as the laughter and abuse began to ring out again, "Oh, got it all worked out, he has. What a load of tripe! Queer old driver," so on, and so forth. "Let us be off, sir," Marmeladov said, suddenly raising his head and turning to Raskolnikov. "Please escort me to Kosel's tenements, the ones with the courtyard. It's time I went back to Katerina Ivanovna." Raskolnikov had been wanting to leave for some time now. He himself had thought of helping the other man. Marmeladov proved to be much less assured on his legs than he had been in his speech, and he leaned mightily on the young man. They had about 200 or 300 yards to go. Embarrassment and fear began to gain a hold on the drunken man, one which increased the closer they came to the house. "It's not Katerina Ivanovna I'm scared of now," he muttered in agitation. "I'm not scared that she'll start pulling me by the hair. What does my hair matter? It's rubbishy stuff. That's what I say. In fact, it'll be better if she does start pulling it. That's not what I'm scared of. It's her eyes that scare me. Yes, her eyes. And the red spots on her cheeks, I'm scared of them too. And also her breathing. Have you ever noticed the way people with that illness breathe when they're excited? I'm also scared of the children's crying, because if Sonia hasn't been feeding them, I don't know what will have become of them. I don't. But I'm not scared of being beaten. I may as well tell you, sir, that not only are such beatings not painful to me, I actually derive pleasure from them, for without them I simply can't go on. It's better that way. Let her beat me. It'll help her to unburden her soul. It's better that way. Well, here are the tenements. The tenements of Kosel. A locksmith, a German, and a man of wealth. Go on, lead the way." They entered the yard and went up to the 4th floor. The further up the staircase they climbed, the darker it grew. It was by now almost 11 o'clock, and although at this time of the year in St. Petersburg there's no real night to speak of, at the top of the stairs it was very dark indeed. A small soot-grimed door at the point where the staircase ended, at its very summit, stood open. A stub of candle shed its light over the most wretched room about 10 yards long. From the passage it could be seen in its entirety. Everything in it was thrown about and in disorder. Particularly noticeable were various ragged items of children's clothing. A sheet which had holes in it had been stretched over one of the rear corners. Behind it there was probably a bed. In the room proper there were only 2 chairs and a very tattered sofa covered in oilcloth, in front of which stood an old pine kitchen table, which had not been painted and bore no covering. On one edge of the table there was a guttering end of tallow candle in an iron candle holder. It turned out that Marmeladov's bed was in a room of his own, and not in the corner, but this room of his was a connecting one, through which everyone else had to pass. The door that led through to the other rooms or cells, into which Amalia Lipovexel's apartment had been broken up, had been left ajar. Noise and shouting came from through there. People were roaring with laughter. They appeared to be playing cards and drinking tea, and from time to time snippets of the most improper language came drifting through. Raskolnikov identified Katerina Ivanovna immediately. She had a lot of flesh, but she was also thin, rather tall woman, with a good figure and beautiful chestnut-coloured hair. Her cheeks really were so flushed that they looked like 2 scarlet spots. She was pacing to and fro in her little room, her hands clenched against her breast, her lips were parched, and her breathing was coming unevenly in little gasps. Her eyes glittered as if in fever, but her gaze was sharp and fixed. It was a morbid effect that was produced by this consumptive and excited face, across which the last glimmer of the guttering candle end trembled and quivered. Raskolnikov thought she looked about 30, and she did indeed seem an unsuitable sort of wife for a man like Marmeladov to have. She had not heard anyone enter, and didn't notice them. She seemed to be in a kind of trance, hearing and seeing nothing. The room was suffocatingly hot, but she had not opened the window. A foul odour drifted up from the staircase, but the door that gave onto it was not closed. From the inner rooms, through the door that was ajar, clouds of tobacco smoke floated. But although she was coughing, she didn't close it either. The very youngest child, a little girl of about 6, was asleep on the floor in a sort of cowering sitting position, her head thrust onto the sofa. A little boy, who must have been about a year older than her, was trembling in a corner, weeping. He looked as though he had just been given a beating. The eldest girl, who must have been about 9, was as tall and slender as a matchstick, and was dressed in nothing but a torn chemise that was covered in holes, and thrown over her bare shoulders a ragged little drap-de-dame's burnous mantlet she had probably made for herself a couple of years ago, since it now did not come down even as far as her knees. She stood in the corner beside her little brother, with one of her long, withered, matchstick-like arms thrown round his neck. She seemed to be trying to soothe him, and was whispering something to him, doing everything she could to stop him from whimpering again, and following her mother fearfully with her big, big dark eyes, which her frightened, gaunt little face made seem even bigger. Marmeladov did not go into the room, but got down on his knees in the doorway, giving Raskolnikov a shove forward. At the sight of the stranger, the woman halted abstractedly in front of him, and seemed to come to for a moment, as if she were wondering, what's he doing in here? Most likely, however, it at once crossed her mind that he was on his way to one of the other rooms, since this was a communicating one. Having decided that this was the case, and paying no further attention to him, she stepped towards the outside door in order to shut it, and then gave a sudden scream upon encountering her husband, who was kneeling on the threshold. "Ah!" she cried in a frenzy of anger. "He's back! The sitter in the stocks! The monster! And where's the money? What have you got in your pockets? Come on, out with it! And those are not your own clothes you're wearing. What have you done with your clothes? Where's that money? Answer me!" And she rushed to search him. Marmeladov at once threw his arms wide apart, meekly and obediently, in order to assist her investigation of his pockets. There was not so much as a kopek's worth of small change left in them. "Where's the money?" she cried. "Oh, Lord, don't say he's gone and drunk the lot. There were 12 silver roubles in that box." And in a sudden frenzy she grabbed him by the hair and hauled him into the room. Marmeladov himself assisted her exertions by meekly crawling after her on his knees. "Even this is a pleasure to me. Even this is not painful to me, but it's a pleasure, my dear respected sir," he managed to yelp out, as he was shaken by the hair, his forehead actually giving the floor a thump at one point. The child, who was asleep on the floor, woke up and started to cry. The boy in the corner could no longer hold himself in check. He shuddered and screamed and rushed to his sister in terrible panic, almost in a seizure. The oldest girl was trembling like a leaf, only half awake. "He's drunk the money! All of it! He's drunk it!" the poor woman cried in despair. "And he's lost his good clothes! And they're hungry! Hungry!" And wringing her hands, she pointed at the children. "Ah, thrice cursed life! And aren't you ashamed?" she said, suddenly turning on Raskolnikov. "You've been at the drinking den. You've been drinking with him, haven't you? You're another one of them. Go on, get out!" The young man hurriedly left without saying a word. What was more, the inner door flew wide open, and several curious onlookers peeped round it. Brazen, laughing heads came craning through, with cigarettes, with pipes, with skull-caps. Figures could be seen in dressing-gowns worn completely open, in summer clothes that bordered on the indecent, some with cards in their hands. Their laughter was particularly animated when Marmeladov, as he was being dragged along by his hair, shouted that it was a pleasure to him. People actually started coming into the room. At last the sound of an ominous shrieking made itself heard. This was Amalia Lipovexel herself forcing her way through in front of everyone else with the intention of restoring order in her own way, and for the 100th time, by terrifying the poor woman with a violently abusive injunction to quit the apartment the very next morning. As he left, Raskolnikov had time to stick his hand in his pocket, scoop out of it the copper change from the rouble he'd spent in the drinking den, and place it unobtrusively on the window-sill. A moment or two later he was already on the staircase. He almost changed his mind and went back. What sort of silly thing to do was that, he thought. They've got Sonia, and I need that money myself. But reasoning that he could not possibly take it back now, and that he had not take it back even if such a thing were possible, he waved his arm impatiently and set off on foot for his lodgings. After all, Sonia does need to buy face cream, you know, he went on, striding along the street and smiling to himself sarcastically. Cleanliness like that costs money. And after all, Sonia herself may go bankrupt today because it's a risky business she's in. As risky as big game hunting or gold mining, and without my money they may all be on their uppers tomorrow. 3 cheers for Sonia. They've hit a rich seam there. And they're making the most of it. My, how they're making the most of it. And now they're grown used to it. They've shed a few tears and are used to it. Man can get used to anything. The villain. He began to reflect. Well, and what if I'm mistaken? He suddenly found himself exclaiming. What if a man, the whole human race in general, isn't really a villain at all? If that's true, it means that all the rest is just a load of superstition, just a lot of fears that have been put in people's heads. And there are no limits. And that's how it's meant to be.